Culture Guild. Welcome, everybody. Lovely to see so many familiar faces. It's really delightful to see back for our session number 2 of the Culture Guild. Before I dive into the tools by which we can consider making culture today, which is what the rest of these sessions will be about, I want to recap what we did 2 weeks ago with Ben and set the scene for what we will do today, which is mostly around signature economies and the work that we have been doing on these cultural tools of kernel, and prepare us for the next cultural guild, which will mostly be hosted by our dear friend Sparrow Reed, and we'll discuss a lot of the tools that they have been building at the platform, which we hope by exposing you to various different approaches, which are nevertheless based on very similar values, you can begin to think for yourselves about how this kind of values-based approach to thinking about culture and the tools by which it is made and how it is consumed and shared, you can advance your own state of the art and contribute to collective culture in your own unique ways, your own unique marks, your own unique signatures. So we're calling this one Signs of the Times, based on where we're going. And we're going to remind ourselves from last week or 2 weeks ago, what does decentralized culture look like? That's really what Ben introduced us to. Today, we're going to look at what tools can we use to examine it together, a deeper dive into the specifics of cultural tools and the memes of production, which is one of my favorite memes. And I've put this last question here as a kind of stretch question for yourselves as you think through this over the weekend and through next week. There is a really, really beautiful book written by a scientist, a man who specializes in something called quantum chromodynamics. His name is Frank Wilczek, and he wrote a book called The Beautiful Question. He asks, does nature embody beautiful ideas? That is the question of that book, and it's truly a stunning inquiry. And so in the same way, can we create culture which embodies beautiful ideas? Maybe I should put that in now. Can we create culture that embodies beautiful ideas? It seems more opposite to what we're actually going to talk about today. So the refresh, keeping it fresh from 2 weeks ago, is that Ben, kind of introduced us to like, what is culture? What are we doing here? Why are we here? All of these existential Canadian questions that he brought to the table. But basically, the most simple explanation after the icebergs and everything that we got was that culture is the why we do things, and technology is the how we do things. But of course, these are together. They're not just complementary opposites in the sense that we talk about in kernel, but represent the entire spectrum of possibility between them. And in fact, when you really look at some of the older Chinese philosophies, you will recognize that complementary opposites don't just illuminate the other pole by virtue of opposing it, they also contain it fully, right? The yin and the yang symbol visually shows that. And it's interesting to begin to start questioning this notion of complementary opposites in its simplistic and dualistic framing, and beginning to see that it's not just this thing of illuminating the other side of the spectrum, but that each opposite contains in full the other, because that leads us further and further away from dualism, that's for sure. Ben then made the point that if we look back in time, in particular periods like the Renaissance, we can see that the development of the printing press led to the decentralizing of information, the development of double entry bookkeeping or accounting led to the decentralizing of value. And in much the same way, we are looking at the internet as another tool, another medium which decentralizes information further, and the blockchain as a means of decentralizing value in a new and different way. But take new with a pinch of salt, because it's always has been all the way down, not just as it applies to blockchain and fancy accounting, but the same sort of pattern of us finding new media, using it to decentralize information and value, then it finding difference in like cultural avenues, which themselves become calcified over time, and we end up with infinite recursion in some way. But recognizing that and having a sense of humor about it, being able to share it in ways which allow for the free flow and expression of ideas and information, perhaps moves us not toward only infinite regression, but what Ben called midnight of the mainstream and the dawn of the delta, which I really adore, because delta here also means change, right? Like the recognition that all is change, right? Is what yin and yang is telling us. Everything is always changing. And yet, when that is held consciously and navigated collectively, then perhaps there are ways of coming to a shared understanding of what action is appropriate in any given moment, and having a culture which supports that kind of way of being, that way of living together, which is not about moral right and wrong. It's not about dogmatic imposition of my truth over your truth. It's much more about a shared exploration of this infinite landscape in which we all live, which is the possibilities of human consciousness. And how can we figure out what streams are the widest and most beautiful to row down at any given moment, without ever thinking that we're in the stream, that we are the people, the chosen ones, the controllers of information, of value, truth. Then Ben asked a number of questions at the end of his slides. The slide deck is in the kernel Slack channel if you need it. And one of them was what I thought I would pull out for the introduction to today's tools-based talk, which is, what do you hope for and dream of? What do you hope for and dream of? And I have a suggestion based on the work in kernel, which I'll illustrate today. But if you have thoughts of your own that you would like to share, please do so in the chat, do so in the kernel Slack channel. The more perspectives that we can get on this particular question, and the more diverse insights that get shared, the more resilient our hopes and dreams become collectively. They're not just the wild imaginings of one lonely and isolated individual alienated from the rest of human society, but the collected desires, the collected well-wishes, the collective well-wishing of all of us. And that seems to be much more resilient, much more adaptable, much more beautiful, especially in times of adversity. My suggestion for this question is that a world in which being wealthy means having enough to share is what I hope for. I hope that is really what we can do. I got involved in Bitcoin so many years ago because somebody told me that Bitcoin wasn't about money, it was about redefining wealth. And I loved that. And it took me years to think about, okay, cool, but what are we redefining it to? And this is my suggestion. Wealth means having enough to share. And the corollary of this, what I dream of, is that the systems that we build and use together can help us to cultivate the realization that each of us, as we are, is already enough. That there is a wealth in being who you are truly, which is already more than enough, so that we can enter into relationship and shared experience and wider culture with the capacity already there to begin sharing, and to share in a way which uplifts, which supports, which cares for, which nourishes, which takes as axiomatic the benefit of others. So, signature economies. This is one of the open source tools that we have built at Kernel over the course of the last 3 years, which we feel helps capture and express some of the ideas that I've just walked over. You can find it at sign.kernel.community. And if you go through it, which we will in a moment, you will see that it is an interactive essay, which expresses some very particular ideas about ownership. It's riffing on the idea of ownership economy, or even the creator economy, and suggesting that there is a different way of imagining what all of this technology is really about, and therefore a different why, which informs the cultures that grow within it. I asked prior to this guild if you would put your ETH addresses into the spreadsheet, which is in the culture channel at the moment. And I will send just enough ETH to the folks who do this. I'll give you another 5 minutes if you would like to. If you would like to mint an NFT from this essay, you're more than welcome to put an address that you control, preferably a MetaMask or Rainbow Wallet address, as opposed to one on an exchange, into that spreadsheet. It's in the culture channel in Slack. So perhaps somebody can grab it from there and share it in the Zoom chat as well. That would be wonderful. And we'll do a group send so that if you don't have any ETH, you can still participate in this particular essay. I encourage you to read the whole thing yourself. I'm not going to read it word for word. What I am going to just emphasize is that the point of the essay is major raison d'être is to ask this question: how can we use technology to cultivate more reciprocal relationships? And as a means of that, it illustrates all of these different ways of transacting, of acting across, of acting with, of acting on these shared and common ledgers. And the nature of transactions can differ depending on how you program them. So there are 3 different kinds of transactions associated with this essay. The first is to simply craft an Ethereum signed message of the whole essay, which you can do for free in a manner which is gasless. Anybody can sign a message on Ethereum. Of course, you need to be able to store that message somewhere, and storing it on chain would have a cost, but we store it for you in a permanent data store, in this case Arweave. So there is a completely non-financial way of interacting with this essay, which is just a signature that connotes agreement with the or connotes having read it. It can connote whatever you like. It doesn't necessarily have to be about agreements. We took the idea from an essay called The Declaration of Interdependence, who actually take this idea much further, in the sense that you can either sign their documents or you can fork it and create your own version. And then, you have these forked and interdependent versions of their declaration. You can find it at interdependence.online if you're looking for this kind of stuff. The code for this is also open source, and you will find explanation about what is going on there, as well as the declaration itself, which you can sign in the same sense that you can sign this Signature Economies essay, or you can fork it and create your own version, which I really, really like. All of that is also handled on Arweave if you go and take a look at their code. The next thing that you can do on Signature Economies is you can highlight any text, just like you can on Medium. And this is where we actually took the idea from. It turned out that, Medium, their highlighting feature, which then allowed you to easily share little snippets out of their essays, really helped them maximize their KPI, because they're a corporation and they tend to work using such acronyms. But their KPI wasn't, eyeballs or attention. It was total time spent reading. And they found that having an easy manner in which to memorialize the pieces that you read and then share those parts which were most meaningful to you in social spaces really pulled together a community of writers and readers who were in constant dialogue outside of the essay itself. And that was really interesting to us. And so we have exactly the same mechanic in the Signature Economies essay, where you can highlight any text, and instead of sharing it on Twitter, you can mint that as an NFT. There's very particular mechanisms which we had to design to make this possible, and I will talk about them in quite some detail in the course of this presentation. But the idea is a simple and beautiful one. And here there is a cost which you will need to pay, which is why I've put the spreadsheet up there. There's no actual fee for minting these NFTs. There is a gas cost in terms of the transaction on the network, because you are changing shared states. And as a result of that, you need to make sure that you need to pay some gas fees. And this is what I've set up for in that spreadsheet. The final piece here, this is like a somewhat financial but mostly meaningful way of interacting with the essay. The final piece is that you can mint a sealed NFT. And again, we had to design very specific mechanisms to allow this to happen in a truly decentralized and open fashion. But the idea here is that this medium, in addition to having the non-financial elements or the limited financial elements, should be able to potentially raise funds to keep kernel sustainable on an ongoing basis. And in order to do that, you can mint very particular kinds of NFTs and choose the amount that you wish to pay to mint those. And then all of the fees come to kernel as a result of that. All of this code is open source. I will take you through the repo in a moment, but I just want to show these mechanisms at work so that you can understand what I'm saying. We can begin this process by asking what I actually control. If I select that, just like you would on Medium, I can create a sign. Here you see it gets populated with a little P5 script that we wrote. We actually designed our own alphabet. Huge kudos to Alyssa March for doing this. And then Malay Vasa wrote a P5 script that takes the each letter that you have selected, translates it into one of the symbols Alyssa designed for our alphabet, and then renders it in what's called a phyllotaxis pattern, which is what you find in aloes and various other plants in nature. And so every time you select different text, you'll see that this pattern is generated in the same way, but using different symbols. And the more text you generate, the more symbols get put into your NFT. You can then mint that, and you will have your signature NFT. That's the somewhat financial interaction because you have to pay gas fees on the network. You can also sign the text. Here you can see that I've already signed this text with the wallets that I have selected, but if I create a new account, love it, testing and production, you can give it a go here and see if we can connect this wallet, and then I should be able to sign this freely. Which is pretty neat. If you like the essay and you like the particular message, then you'll see that the whole essay pops up as the message that you sign on Ethereum. I can sign that, and after a little while, you will find, you can share this on Twitter, and you will find that your signature pops up here with your address, the transaction on Arweave, where we put it for you, and the date that you signed it. So completely free. And the means of making your mark in a way that truly is memorialized. And then the final piece is this notion of being able to mint a seal. These seals each contain a very particular image that was made by an incredible designer called Kirill Noskov. And Kirill spent ages in this incredible 3D program so that we could generate these high-resolution seals, each of which is based upon a planet, and on the back of which is included a particular quote from kernel. So here you will find various different quotes. This one is from the Play of Pattern, right? Quantum Thought, we looked at it in the slides earlier. And on the front is a seal to do with Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, all of these different planets. And in addition to that, you will find that if you choose to pay between 0.1 and 1 ETH, the seal will be square. If you choose to pay between 1 and 10 ETH, the seal will be hexagonal. If you choose to pay 10 or more ETH, the seal will be circular. The thinking here is that we wanted to have some way to encourage folks to consider like donating more, but we didn't want to like privilege it too much, right? Like we don't want to have completely different images or like give away, it leads to a culture of elitism in some sense if you have like completely different images or much more detail or like much higher resolution or all of these different ideas we explored. And eventually we decided, there's this like really subtle thing of like the more you donate, the more edges your seal has, right? So like between 0.1 and 1 ETH, it's 4 edges, then it's 6 edges, and then its circle has like infinite edges. And you get the same image, the same color, the same attention to detail and care, and just like more edges in the graph if you're willing to participate more in like these ongoing funding mechanisms in like increasingly meaningful ways that will enable kernel to go on.
I'm just about to move it.
Hello, Brad. Was that a question or did you just come off mute? Okay.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was unmuted as I changed.
No problem. All good. So those are the three mechanisms for interacting with this essay. I would love for you to read the essay yourself. And we now have a bunch of, Yarek, if you could just put your, I will do this for you. Okay. I need ETH addresses in here to send your, let's see, grab that address. Don't do this at home, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, there's a really cool little tool called multisend.eth, which I'm going to use to I'm going to use this to send ETH to the folks who have put their addresses into the spreadsheet. You should have enough here to mince at least one highlight NFT. I have also not used this tool in production, so this is the first for me. If it fails, please don't hate me. We'll take a look. Oh dear. That might not have worked. So I did test it a long time ago, and it worked, but it might be the case that, well, we'll see. We'll see if it works or not. They tried to send me to Robston, but perhaps we have been successful.
Just worked.
There we go. Perfect. So if you put your address in that spreadsheet, you should have enough ETH to mint a highlight NFT, and that's wonderful. Now, I want to discuss various different aspects of how this stuff works in practice, because while we have gone to enormous lengths to make sure that all of this remains open source, that the code itself is exactly what it says it does, that we provide the most powerful cultural tools we can possibly make ourselves to everyone, there are a whole bunch of stories to be told about like what goes on in the wider markets, in the wider cultural marketplace, in terms of how these tools end up playing out. And in order to illustrate that, I am going to take a look at OpenSea, because they have done some really interesting things which are worth discussing and worth knowing about. You will see that today, if you're in Africa, I'm not sure about the rest of the world, the NFTs for your signature NFT are not displaying. This content cannot be requested through the gateway you are using. And this is an interesting error to get on OpenSea. Why is it the case that they cannot be found through this interface? If I go and take a look at the link that it's trying to pull from, I will see that it is looking at something called OpenSea-private.mypinata.cloud. Isn't that fascinating? Because indeed, if I go to it, then I see this weird error that, there's nothing pulling through for the image of my NFT. And what on earth is this OpenSea-private.mypinata.cloud URL doing? Is that what is in the signature NFT contracts? And we can go and take a look in the code, or indeed on Etherscan, which I will do in a moment because the code is verified there too, and we can talk about that. But in the contracts themselves, if we go to the signature NFT, this is what it looks like. And you will see that the gateway for these things is set to ipfs.io/ipfs. And the token URIs are returned in this function here, where we encode JSON data rather than passing back a URL, which is really prone to breaking and not a resilient way of doing these things. We've written an overriding token URI function that specifies new and different logic than is what is ordinarily the case in EOC 721. And we construct our own data directly in the contract and return it all as JSON rather than sending people to a URL that might disappear at some stage. And when we look at the image, we can see that we use the gateway and then we concatenate it with the hash and we pass what those numbers are that you see here, right? Which is, in this case, 6403 to 6677, which is the index of the characters that the highlight starts at and ends at. And it's really weird, isn't it? Because we would expect that OpenSea would return a result from ipfs.io plus whatever information we have sent it to, not OpenSea-private.pinata.cloud. That's really weird, isn't it? So if we go to OpenSea, if we go to what is actually in the contract, ipfs.io, what appears? Fascinating, isn't it? There you go. There is the image that we are expecting to appear in our NFTs on OpenSea. But because OpenSea strips ipfs.io domains and replaces them in their interface with this Pinata gateway, and the Pinata gateway sometimes goes down, it means that images which I spent months making sure were immutable and resilient do not appear on their interface today as I do this presentation, because they have made the choice to use their own cloud and not honor the information that is returned back from contracts. Now it does work because I complained on Twitter about 2 hours ago, and they're clearly, literally right now just fixed it, which is hilarious. The other aspect of this, which is really upsetting, without getting into like too much of the code, which I want to kind of stay away from as we look more at cultural aspects of this and how it appears in the interfaces and the marketplaces where culture is actually made, is that if you look at this particular NFT, which Dear Joan actually went through and minted herself and then sold, the first signature NFT that has been sold, we can go and look at that sale, and it has some interesting information associated with it too, because you can see that she sold it for 0.001 ETH, 0.000975 went to her, and 0.00025 went to the OpenSea fees account. That's kind of interesting. So there's a 2.5% fee on anything sold through OpenSea. And that's fascinating because if we go and look at the contract, we can take a look and we see in like the imports here that there's this ERC 721 tradable contract that it's importing. And if we go into our base contracts and look at the tradable contract, all of which are standard tools, you can pull these from the OpenZeppelin repos, or indeed these ones are adapted from the work on Neuropunks that Holly Grimm did. And here, in my ERC 721 tradable contract, there's a contract-wide royalties contract, which is defined. So let's go and take a look at that, because it seems like we've been setting contract-wide royalties for the whole contract. And does that match the 2.5% that we just saw in this transaction here that's going to OpenSea? Well, we can take a look at the contract itself, which is the signature Economies contract. And it's really neat. Etherscan offers this great service where you can verify contracts. So a little green tick means that it has been verified that the bytecode deployed at this address does indeed resolve to these particular contracts. And here you can see the version of the signature NFT contract, which is on chain. And you can see that I was not lying about the way that the gateway is set and the changes that OpenSea make to it. And you can see that it does indeed import the tradable contract, which does indeed import the royalties contract. And we can tell that by just going to this read contract tab. Read and write contract are really useful on Etherscan if you ever want to like go and just verify for yourself what is happening in any given NFT contract or any given contract or address on chain. These things can be really, really useful, again, as cultural tools, because you can go and take a look without having to read code at like what is actually happening in each contract. And we want to go and take a look at the royalty info for this particular NFT. So its index is 126. So if we sell token with ID index 126 for a value of 0.001 ETH, which we have to encode as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, because ETH is 1 times 10 to the 18 on chain. So this 1 followed by 15 zeros is 0.001. We can query what the amount of royalties should be, and we can see that the receiver should be 0x7 BAC, and the amount should be 0.0001, 10%, right? I know this, I mean, you can do the calculation yourself. I know this because I set it myself, and 0x7 DAC is the kernel multisig account. And that's clearly like not what has happened in this transaction, right? There's a 2.5% fee, and it's going to the OpenSea fees account, not 10% to the kernel multisig account. And this is because in the ERC 2981 standard, which is what the royalty standard on Ethereum is, it doesn't like force sales transactions to split fees at the moment of sale. It just returns information about what royalties should be for this contract or for this token, because you can do 2981 token specific or contract wide, because sometimes royalties need to differ. And I think Sparrow will discuss that next week. Certainly in the platform, you would want to have something more like token specific royalties for different books and different authors and different things. In our case here, because it's all managed by kernel and it's one essay, it made sense to have contract wide royalties. But the royalty stuff, it just returns information about what royalties should be. It does not force at point of sale the splits of royalties, because doing that would require us to change the logic associated with transfers deep down in the 721 standard itself, and like changing those base contracts, which come from libraries like OpenZeppelin, which have been incredibly well audited and are used and battle tested in the environment. Going in here and changing transfer functions is really finicky work, and it shouldn't be undertaken lightly, because the cultural tools that we're most interested in exist like at least a few layers up from what I'm demonstrating here. It shouldn't be the case that you need to understand how to split transaction payments right down in like the base level libraries in order to achieve the royalties that you might experience. And yet, because a lot of this stuff still relies on centralized marketplaces for its proper display and its cultural value, we end up in the same old misaligned incentives paradigm as we've always operated within, which is that OpenSea is incentivized to keep charging this opaque 2.5% creator fee on all sales that go through their platform, which is not enacted on chain. It is a part of the logic in their proxy address on the marketplace that they create. And to not listen to the information that creators put on chain about the royalties that they would like to have in their contracts, because adopting an open standard for them is at odds with the business case that they have to make 2.5% on every sale in order to go on funding the platform that promulgates these particular like images and that hosts this interface. So it's like the same old problem, that as soon as you have an intermediary, there's a misalignment of incentives between what users and creators really want and what the platform enacts as a result of its own business needs. I thought that it would be nice to kind of illustrate that and like open it up into some like further cultural discussion around some of these issues. There's much more that I can say about like the technical way in which we have achieved those images on IPFS and how they actually work and why it's interesting to encode the start and end index of a highlighted piece rather than any of the other methodologies we might have gone through. But you can read that in the kernel blog that I showed. And similarly speaking, there's some really interesting work that we did on uploading structured directories to Arweave such that we can have those dynamic images in the sealed NFTs without having our own API, without running our own server. We just simply put a structured directory into Arweave, and then we have logic in the contract that, by virtue only of the value associated with the message that mints an NFT, selects either the square, the hexagonal, or the circular image. Both of these, I think, are enormously innovative ways of handling dynamic images in an immutable fashion. But you can see that even our best efforts are sometimes foiled by platforms like OpenSea for their own business reasons. And I know why they use Pinata, why they strip IPFS URLs and use Pinata. It's because Pinata is generally speaking much faster, and the load time on Pinata is generally speaking much lower than IPFS.io. But here we are, and doing a presentation, and Pinata is down. So these are the trade-offs that are being made beneath all of the high rhetoric of the dawn of the Delta and some of the stuff that I myself indulged in the first 15 minutes. So Sparrow has her hand up. Perhaps we can go to you and open it up into wider discussion. That would be lovely.
Yeah, so just adding to what was a beautiful presentation. One, you didn't mention the cost of running a Pinata server, and probably those 2.5% fees don't even pay for that for them. So it boggles the mind, the centralized infrastructure and the consequences of that ripple out. But anecdotally, as you know, as Andy knows probably, Data, which is a collective that I'm a part of, were the first people to encode royalties into a smart contract on Ethereum. And they actually they approached OpenSea when it was just the two guys, right? Devin and I'll forget his name, to support royalties for artists. And at the time, that was when CryptoKitties were the NFTs, and they're like, there's no money in art, so no, that would take effort. We're not going to do it. And as a consequence of that, the Data NFTs could not be traded on OpenSea because Data refused to allow OpenSea to take that 2.5% without honoring their royalties. And as a consequence of that, the Creeps and Weirdos collection went relatively unknown for about 4 years, until it was discovered by some NFT archaeologists as one of the earliest NFT projects on blockchain. But the decisions that are made by individual platforms have ripple effects, I guess, is the point. And it's interesting over time to see what those ripples are.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're looking for a really, really cool cultural artifact in kernel, there is a presentation given by a man called Isaac Putka called Creeps and Weirdos. And I will put it back in the cultural channel, because the rescue of the Creeps and Weirdos collection is truly a story of epic proportions. I'm not generally a fan of like the hero's journey, but let me tell you, as far as this goes, this was a hero's journey of note. So understanding some of those things, and you're absolutely right. So these small decisions that we make in terms of like how we approach the tools that we build and the kinds of effort and intentionality that we put into them are absolutely critical, and they have really difficult to predict and long-lasting consequences. So, for instance, like another example of this is like you can go through the Signature Economies repo and take a look at all of the different iterations that we did around how to actually mint one of these highlight NFTs. Because in the beginning, I was very much in the space of saying, we have a totally open mint function. People can send whatever they want as a URL to the mint function. So in order to mint a highlight NFT, you just like pass the URL that you want to mint to the thing. And our front end will generate the right URL in terms of that beautiful image that you see and have the whole thing. But anybody can call that mint function. And a dear friend of mine, Simon Frimeau, who's the man who actually wrote 2981, sort of audited the contracts, and he called me. He said, "You absolutely cannot do this." And I was like, "Simon, what? You're this, delightful French anarchist. How on earth can you tell me I can't have an open mint function? What are you talking about?" He says, No. I've done a lot of NFT contracts in my life, and when people have open mint functions, there are all sorts of trolls out there who start putting in really like horrific content that is often illegal, and it gets your collection banned from all of these marketplaces, and you don't want to do that. And I sort of took a look at this and I thought, well, it kind of kills a little bit of my soul not to have an open, like permissionless contract. And it's strange to think about having access roles in like a cultural tool that is meant to be entirely open. But in order to like prevent bad actors and stuff, it seems like we have to, And so Simon was very kind. He actually wrote like a really, really incredible, and if you look in Guild Hacking, the link to his commits, which added this like access control onto our mint function and specified a signer account, which we ourselves could then could deactivate if we wanted, is there. And that was like a neat solution at first. We thought, okay, so like fine, we have this like modified mint function, which says only verified signer, and then we have this verified signer account, and we can perhaps deactivate it at some point if we want. It plays into the whole narrative of gradual decentralization and all of this kind of stuff. And that was kind of okay. But then the other Simon, who works on kernel services and is an truly incredible engineer in his own right, took a look at this. He said, "No, you cannot have a controlled access when if you're building open cultural tools. You need to do better. I don't know how, but you need to do better." And it took another 2 months of research to figure out that like we can return base 64 encoded JSON by overriding the token URI function. So instead of returning a URL when people query what is the URI for token number 126, instead of returning a URI, you can just return JSON directly out of the contract itself. So you're not relying on any, and you can form that JSON in the contract. You have total control over it. And we figured out, well, what we can do is we can host a single page React application on IPFS, because if it's single page, you don't have to worry about IPNS and all the complexity that goes along with it. It's just at one hash always. And that single page React application can accept in the URL any number of parameters it likes. And in this case, the parameters are the index that the highlight starts at and the index that it ends at. The single page application has a copy of the essay that is the same that is referenced in the contract and the same that is on the front end at sign.kernel.community. And then we can, when minting an NFT, you can just, in order to mint an NFT, you have to pass in a start and an end. That's how you mint an NFT. So now the function is totally open. There's no signer, there's no permission, there's no nothing. It's just you have to pass in a beginning number and an ending number. The function checks whether that is within the parameters of the essay itself. Does it like start after 0 and end before 15,000 something? And off you go. And if you pass those requirements, then because we know that you're not going to be able to produce any illegal or horrific content, it's always going to be some version of the essay. And that's a really neat solution that leverages an understanding about IPFS and content addressability and the fact that you can pass information in URL encoded parameters to a particular thing that generates dynamic images based on information that comes out of the contract. I've never seen anybody else do it this way, and it took a damn long time to figure it out. And it took the longest time because of this pinata thing in OpenSea, and like testing it on Rinkeby and OpenSea and being like, why the hell is the stuff going to pinata? I'm encoding it as IPFS. So like these kinds of things, you have to kind of reverse engineer the marketplaces themselves. And so it does take a lot more effort to build like genuinely open cultural tools, but it's worth it because, for instance, now like this pattern of like return base 64 encoded JSON, have people mint NFTs within specific parameters, form those parameters in the contract itself and pass it to a single page React application that accepts information encoded in the URL, allows people to, for instance, have dynamic impact certificates or dynamic, like I'm not a very good React dev. So like that single page application, like the P5 script, which is exquisite, was written by Malay. And like like a monkey at a keyboard was like, okay, React, there we go, done, right? And if you are like much better at that kind of stuff, then you can build much more advanced stuff hosted at a single hash, single ID in IPFS and do incredibly like just incredible stuff based on this like pattern. That's as I say, it took ages, and I lost a lot of hair while I was trying to figure out this particular. And lots of times I didn't think it was going to work.
So I was going to answer the question Tabia, I hope I said that right, raised in the chat about the royalties and Mintbase getting the creator royalties back, while OpenSea also gets their 2.5% commission. And that's true with quite a few of the platforms. So Super Rare, Known Origin, as well as Mintbase and probably Foundation and all of the others. But they actually had to go and negotiate individually with OpenSea to have OpenSea honor their royalties. And I remember being told, particularly for Super Rare, that the royalties for Super Rare were honored on any buy it now NFTs because they had modified their buy it now contract to allow them to be honored. However, if you auctioned a Super Rare NFT, the royalties would not be honored because they had not yet been able to update, and they probably would not be able to update their auction contracts. So it really does get very complicated very quickly.
Yeah, it does. Are there other questions? It's because it's fascinating to explore. Like here's the vision of the dawn of the Delta and these free and permissionless networks, and yet here this is like the state of reality now. And Sparrow has been, the incredible people at Data have been doing work like this for years, and I think that's the ability to like both honor that from my perspective first, and secondly just to recognize the multiple nests of interest that have to be navigated in order to have truly open tools by which we can all genuinely participate in making culture and in expressing ourselves in the way that we feel comfortable with and that we feel like represent us and value us appropriately. And I can't tell, it's like, for me, I'm like, like I've been working on Ethereum long enough that I'm okay, but it's like enormously confronting, right? To spend a great deal of time like working on a standard and understanding what 2981 is and integrating into the contracts and writing the tests and thinking very deeply about like what this stuff is and is it contract wide, is it token wide, how do we use it? Like endless conversations with Simon, what is this stuff? How does it work? And then OpenSea is just like, no. It's really it's difficult. It's difficult to kind of understand fully, and it certainly goes against some of the decentralizing of information and value that Ben is talking about in those first slides, which I started with today. Like, yes, but is basically what I feel when we actually get into the tools and start looking at the state of the art at the moment.
It also leads into, and this touches Joan's question, right? The tools that we have available to us currently. Andy mentioned the Open Zeppelin contracts, and I mean, that could be a whole workshop in and of itself, right? It's a really great tool, and I'll post links in the Slack channel afterwards, that allow you to deploy an ERC 721 contract, an 1155 contract, an ERC 20 token, right? If you wanted your own token, it's there. You press a button, you enter some information, and that contract is generated for you. You can go then to Remix and deploy that contract, and that contract for you, that's your contract. It's live. But how do you mint, A, and how do people see what is minted on it? And the second part of that, how do people see the things that you've created, is why OpenSea becomes important. Because the tools we currently have allow us to deploy contracts. I'm not aware of any tools currently that allow you to easily deploy a front end that connects to your contract. And so not only do you need some Solidity development, but you need to be a front-end Web3 developer and know React, as Andy was saying, for his app, and how to connect that to your contract. Otherwise, you are reliant on the big marketplaces like OpenSea and Rarible and LooksRare in order to trade and sell your NFTs. So there's multiple layers to the stack, and some are more open and decentralized. And I guess, so in the next session, I think setting that up sort of, one of the things that I identified as an artist was this gap in self-sovereignty for artists. And that was, not all artists can be front-end developers. Not all artists can connect, a front-end website to their smart contract. And so there's that gap in enabling artists to have control of their creations in the way that they want to have control, and to have those creations represent them in the world in the way that they want, rather than by broken links on OpenSea. And that's what the platform is trying to, that's one of the gaps the platform is trying to fill.
Amazing. There's
I hope that's a good segue to the next session.
A worthy heart. It's a wonderful segue into the next section. There's we do have like a few more minutes scheduled after this. I know it's coming to the top of the hour, and if you need to go, you're more than welcome to. But it is funny, Sparrow, that you should say this, because one of the things that I would like to encourage you all to play around with, in addition to the OpenSea wizard, which is truly remarkable, and as with everything they do, well built, robust, a great learning tool. Here is like a good way to go to like begin learning like some Solidity in addition to Ethernauts, which is their other thing. And both of these you can find discussed in the build section on the kernel website. But one of the other things, as Sparrow was, really pointing out, is that we, there's a whole stack of stuff involved with this idea of cultural tools. And at the very top, you can just like go and upload an image on one of these marketplaces, mint an NFT based on it, and try and sell it. I see my connection is unstable. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah. Okay, good. So, at the top layer, you can go to a marketplace, you can upload an image and make it an NFT. But if you want to be involved in genuine cultural production, then, like as Sparrow is saying, there's this whole stack associated with it. And we, as a result of that, are building a whole bunch of infrastructure at Kernel for our own kind of learning environments and all of the stuff that we want to do here. But what I wanted to sort of show today is inspired by the Open Zeppelin wizards. We have our own kind of environments within like the kernel wallets, which you can all go and play around with on staging.wallet.kernel.community today. And if you go to the Mint tab, you will find a template contract in here, which has a whole bunch of stuff in it. And if you compile this contract in your browser, you can see that it takes a little while because running compilation client side is always an interesting experience. But then you can also run it directly in your browser, which is really neat. So this is a NFT token contract for SVGs. And if I want to go in and kind of maybe change anything associated with my SVGs, then I can just compile and run these again. And there directly in my browser, I can start playing around with NFTs and their particular SVG versions. So that you can see that like getting involved with this stuff and starting to get further down the stack to the place where like genuine cultural innovation and contributions and collective creativity occur. Like there is a lot of people working on this particular thing based on some of the experiences that I've illustrated today, which are not unique to kernel by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, are predated by people like Dada and the Invisible Economy by many, many years. And so many of us within the community have recognized these kinds of issues for a long time and are finally in positions where we can start thinking very seriously about like the kinds of tools that really give more and more people inclusionary access to lower and lower down the stack so that we can do cooler and cooler stuff together. And that's like an ongoing thing. I don't think that it's ever going to be like, okay, we've done it. It's just like, how much more of the stack can we unfold and invite people into and play around with and like look at together as we like continue along, because that's really what it means to me to work with our tools rather than having tools that work for us and then inevitably get co-opted by capitalistic practices which break your dearly beloved NFT images that you spent 2 months researching how to do, and instead like invite us into like a working with that is much more participatory, that's much more immersive, that's much more persuasive and much more like nourishing in many, many different ways as a cultural practice, as an artistic practice, as the memes of production, which truly distribute power broadly across many groups and many worldviews and many aesthetics and many perspectives. Okay. If there are other questions, dances, sudden VR artworks, or anything else that might delight the group at large, now is the time. Please come forth. If not, the guild culture channel is always open. I will post the creeps and weirdos archaeology in there because it's another dive deeper down into the technical stack, which I hope you will enjoy. And hopefully continues to integrate some of these like deeper thoughts about what the tools actually are, how they can be improved, and how they can lead to genuinely that dawn of the delta, many different streams, broadly watered and happy and lively landscape. If you have specific questions about your own practice or your own work, please like drop them in there. There's incredible people on this call and in this channel. So we're here to build tools that help us help each other. We're not here to govern each other, anything like that. Just help us help each other. That's what it's all about.